My brothers and sisters, without further ado, I introduce to you Lieutenant General Nadja West.
Well, thanks, Father Hyson. Thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and also for the invitation to speak to you today. Though I must admit that I do feel a bit odd as a fellow parishioner that shares fellowship with you on most Sundays. And I tell you, Father Geis from St. James thinks that we've defected. He's really, that's our parish there, but really love it here. And so, I'm a fellow parishioner here, and I share fellowship with you. And I'm really not sure that anything that I could say could possibly be as interesting and as inspiring as the things that we hear each week from our wonderful priests, from an order who, by definition, are expert preachers. So that's going to be a hard act to follow, but I'll definitely give it a try. And again, first, I would really like to express my deep admiration for the Dominican Friars, who were formed in part as a response against a heresy which denied the dignity of our humanity, and who also foster devotion to our Blessed Mother, who is, I have no doubt, directly responsible for me being here today. We all know the biology and such of how human beings get here, but when you hear the story that I will tell you here this evening, I think you'll understand why I say this. So with this in mind, I would like to highlight the life of one woman whose story is not very well known. Hers is truly a story of faith, resilience, and perseverance that I think you might find interesting, because she truly embodies our values and beliefs, our devotion to Our Lady, spirituality, and service for others. And she was really a big fan of St. Jude as well. And her name was Mabel, and she was born in the early 1900s in Hot Springs, Arkansas, the granddaughter of slaves and the second oldest child of a family headed by her father, who with his wife raised 7 children on the money he made from tips as a bellman, carrying luggage for guests at the Arlington Hotel at a Hot Springs resort, which is still in operation today, by the way. Her father died of a heart attack at a young age, which left her mother to raise 7 children by herself. And as we remember from our history, growing up in the 1900s during the Depression era was very challenging, to say the least. Early in her childhood, Mabel became very ill with high fevers and stomach pains, and the family doctor who came to the home diagnosed her with peritonitis, which is basically inflammation of the abdominal cavity, and from what was later found out due to a ruptured appendix. And as you may know, acute appendicitis is a surgical emergency, and the doctor told Pearl, Mabel's mother, that she would die without surgery. Well, the family didn't have money for surgery, and there were really very few alternatives at that time in the segregated South. And so the doctor, though he seemed to truly care, told the family that there was really nothing he could do, and he would try to make Mabel comfortable until she died. Well, Pearl did not want to hear that. She didn't want to hear that she would be losing her daughter, and was determined that Mabel would live. And Pearl's motto was that with God, anything was possible. And she transferred that determination and reliance on God to her daughter, and remained with her all throughout her life. And Mabel did miraculously survive, though she did have complications from the untreated ruptured appendix. She later told her mother about seeing a beautiful lady that kept smiling at her, who was holding a kind of a necklace in her hand when she was unconscious. So remember that point for later. So as Mabel grew up, that determination and drive stayed with her. And though the odds of succeeding were small, she knew she would overcome those odds and make a difference. She was always taught that education was key, so she worked many odd jobs, taking small steps to reach her goal. She moved to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to follow an opportunity to go to beauty school, and recalled getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get to one of her jobs as a window washer so she could finish before her classes started. Coming from the South, she had not encountered weather as cold as it was there in Pittsburgh, and she remembers her first experience of having the water in her eyes freeze while cleaning windows one winter morning. Undaunted, she continued, focusing on her goal and improving herself so that she could make a difference. She completed beauty school and worked as a hairdresser until she saved enough money to put herself through college, and she eventually graduated from college at Ohio State, where she studied journalism. She went on to be a writer on the staff of the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper, a publication that was established in 1892 that crusaded for racial equality and economic advancement. So it was now the 1940s, and it was truly her time to make a difference, which she did with a passion. She, along with the newspaper's photographer William Scott, risked their lives on many occasions to expose injustices and to give a voice to the disenfranchised, and had a profound effect on social change. She took on many issues, often enlisting the assistance of Thurgood Marshall, the former Supreme Court justice who was then a civil rights lawyer who would travel around the country working on many cases, usually for no pay, and only other than a place to stay, since many of the towns that they visited did not have accommodation for blacks during that time. She helped enlist and secure the support of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt to allow African American WACs, as they were called, which is the Women Army Corps, to serve overseas during World War II. They were previously not allowed to represent our nation on foreign soils. She took on the mission of lobbying the War Department, which is now the Department of Defense, to desegregate Arlington Cemetery during World War II. Previously, all soldiers of color, including our Native Americans, were buried in a separate section. And her perseverance paid off, and she was successful in ensuring that soldiers who died for their country did not have to bear the indignity of segregation even in death. And so it's quite fitting that she and her husband, along with one of their sons, now rests in Arlington Cemetery, not too far from the eternal flame of the gravesite of President Kennedy. Did she answer the call to social justice? I think so. But guess what? Her story doesn't stop here. She has countless other contributions in the civil rights arena, but she always felt that she could do more. After going through some troubling times, her brother, who is actually the pastor of Berean Baptist Church, which is right here in Washington, D.C., told her one day, and very oddly, that she should talk to a priest. And later he said he didn't know what seized him to tell her that. You know, again, here he is a pastor, they grew up as a Baptist family, but he said talk to a priest, and she did, at Holy Redeemer Church, which is also here in Washington, D.C., and that led to her conversion to Catholicism. And that's where she also learned, after all those years, what that kind of a necklace was that she saw as a dying child. She saw what it really was, and that started her lifelong devotion to Our Lady of the Rosary and her zeal to do more to help others. And after her marriage to a soldier in 1950 and her first trip out of the country to an overseas assignment, Mabel found that opportunity to do something. While overseas, her husband went on many extended field exercises, and so each time she would go on various tours and visited several holy sites. She visited Lourdes, Our Lady of Czestochowa in Poland. She saw the Infant of Prague in Czechoslovakia at the time, now the Czech Republic. And when she returned to her home overseas, had a chance meeting with some Catholic nuns who invited her to visit one of the local orphanages. And that day she knew what she could do to make a difference. And over the next several years, Mabel and her husband had, with their connections from their journalism days and the assistance of several airlines, arranged for the adoption by families in the United States of over 500 abandoned and orphaned children. And since the scar tissue from her previous ruptured appendix had affected her ability to have children of her own, Mabel and her husband adopted 12 children of their own, and all went on to persevere and contribute as well. One of her sons joined the Army and served in Vietnam. One daughter served her country with distinction in the Navy and ended a 31 career serving on the aircraft carrier USS Roosevelt during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Another daughter is a teacher in a Native American village in Alaska and has adopted a son of her own. And time really doesn't permit me to tell you about the rest. And though she did not seek publicity or fame, in 1968, Mabel and her husband's efforts were recognized, and they both received the Papal Humanitarian Award from Pope Paul VI. So for the rest of her life, she continued to be an inspiration for all on how one person from a humble beginnings can make a difference, change America positively, and influence how Americans are perceived by other nations. And I think about how different this world would be today if many years ago that determined little girl who refused to die had succumbed to her illness. All of the individual positive changes that she made may not have occurred. over 500 children would have easily wandered off the face of the earth, unknown and not knowing the love of a family. And I would definitely not be standing in front of you here today, and most certainly would not have had the privilege of being an American soldier like my dad, as I am one of those 12 children that benefited from her and my father's unbelievable love and their great example of what good and decent human beings can do. She and my dad gave me a second chance at the wonderful gift of life. They gave me my faith, my devotion to Our Lady, and also to St. Jude, one of my mom's favorites, and also my confirmation saint. And I attribute to St. Jude all the other blessings and things that have come my way since that time. And so in closing, I'd like to ask you to reflect for just one moment on what and where America is today. If you think about it, in our relatively short history as a nation, we've eclipsed many others who've been in existence for millennia. And we've done it through the commitment and sacrifice of countless men and women of faith who responded to the challenge to make a difference. And so today I challenge you all here and ask you, you came just for a talk here, but I'm going to give a challenge too, Father, if that's okay. I want you to think, how will you make a difference? So how will you be women and men for others? I know that's the Jesuits, but I kind of borrowed that. So Mabel Grammer's story really confirms that it really doesn't matter where you start, and mine as well. It doesn't matter where you start, it's but how you finish. So how will you cross the finish line? And so I ask that may we all continue to change America for the good so that our nation continues to be the shining example of freedom and hope that it is for the world. And so God bless our nation, God bless our wonderful parish, and God bless all of you. And thank you all so much for your very kind attention. Thank you.